What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV, and this is as we look at this season, right? And as we look at the 2019-20 season, and you see how the New York Knicks still just can't get over their woes. You know what I'm saying? They just continue to be one of the worst teams in the NBA. They just recently fired their coach, Marvin Fitzgerald. And they're still trying to figure out who the next coach is going to be. Hopefully, it'll be a guy like Mark Jackson. I saw shout out to Ticket TV, and I subscribed to Ticket TV. He did a video recently saying that Better World Peace, aka also known as Ron Artest, would like to be the next head coach. But the fact remains that the Knicks are an organization that just over the past, for the most part, the past 15 or 20 years, have descended into being one of the worst franchises in the league. They did have that one good year back in 2011, 12, I think it was, when they won 54 games. I think that was a year. One of those years, or 12, 13. But, yeah, for the most part, they've been a horrible franchise. And you contrast that with the Miami Heat, who in the past 15, 20 years have won 3 championships. And you also look at the fact that this year, surprisingly, they are one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the NBA. That kind of came out of nowhere, especially so soon after the departures of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, relatively speaking. So this kind of begs the question to me. How much does this have to do with the departure of Pat Riley back in the mid-1990s? And I know this might seem a little far-fetched, but think about it for a second. Back in 1995, the Knicks were a completely different organization. Back in 1995, the New York Knicks were seen as the best team in the Eastern Conference. They had just lost a grueling 7-game series to the Houston Rockets, a series that most observers would tell you that the Knicks lost more than the Houston Rockets won. Now, don't get me wrong. Akeem Olajuwon was brilliant in that series, and many guys like young Robert Orr at the time and rookie Sam Cassell and Vernon Maxwell, all these guys stepped up in that series. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, when you look at the Knicks and you look at lineup, and you look at who was playing, and despite the fact that Patrick Ewing only shot 36 or 37% from the floor that series, despite the fact that John Starks only shot 37% from the floor that series, and famously only 2 of 18 in the last game, had his worst game as a professional in the wrong time, still only lost the game by 6 points, I think, 90-84. And Ewing had so many James Harden-like shooting games that series, like 8 for 29, 9 for 29, and 11 for 30. And he had these horrible shooting nights, but yet they would only lose by 4 points. But the fact is I'm saying that the Knicks were a really good team, man. And you contrast that with the Miami Heat, who were a team that only been around for maybe 6 seasons, 7 seasons. They were one of the worst teams in the league. They weren't going anywhere, and that's not a knock on, guys who were playing for the team back then. I think it might have been Glenn Rice and, Steve Smith. I think Grant Long was on those teams, and, it's not a knock on them, but they weren't a really good franchise at all. Pat Riley was, at that time, seen as the best coach in the NBA. I know Phil Jackson had won championships with the Bulls, but this is before the second three-peat. And Pat Riley had not only came out of seemingly nowhere with the Lakers, he was a broadcaster when he retired, and he eventually became the head coach of the Lakers. And he led the Lakers, the Showtime Lakers, to 4 titles. The first one they won with a different coach, but they won championships with uh, Pat Riley in '82, '85, '87, and '88. And Pat Riley, after his tenure with the Lakers ran its course, I think went back to the booth during 1991 with NBC. But then he went back. The bug was still there. The desire to be part of the NBA and coaching was still there. And he went to the Knicks, which is a totally different team. They weren't this run and gun, high octane offensive team. They were a defensive orientated team, half court team. But he turned that team around. That team had been, for the most part, of the '80s, a middling, average, or poor team. And all of a sudden, the Knicks became a really good team and the only real rivals to the Chicago Bulls post bad boy era. And Pat Riley had them guys having the Bulls. He had the Knicks giving the Bulls some sweats, man. They went 7 games in 1992 unexpectedly, and that was arguably the best Bulls team of all time. I mean, some people would put the '96 Bulls as the best, but that '67 win Bulls team has a good case for being the best Bulls team, and the Knicks went the limit with them. And then '93, they had the Bulls almost down for the count before the Bulls were able to come back, and it took all of Jordan's and Pippen's theatrics to get that team turned around and come back from that deficit. But there was something that Pat Riley was sensing by '94 and '95. He thought that this team was maxing out. And by this time, Pat Riley was 50 years old. He had been coaching for well over a decade altogether. You got to take into account the years when he was not coaching. He wanted more control. And it was at this time that the Miami Heat were, depending on how you look at it, maybe they were doing it illegally, or maybe they're tampering because you're not supposed to be communicating with an active coach on another team. But there was some communication going on, and they were saying, "Look, well, we'll give you total control. You can be head coach and you can be team president." And that was alluring to a guy like Pat Riley, who was sensing that this Knicks team needed some changes. But as a coach, he was only relegated to what was going on the court. The Knicks weren't willing to give him that control. So ultimately, shockingly to most NBA observers outside of the league, he resigned as the Knicks coach. And he left to become the head coach and team president of the Miami Heat. So when Pat Riley gets there, I can't remember every trade or every move, but I know that the big move was that Glenn Rice was traded. All right, Glenn Rice, he was a fine shooter, but he's not the type of player that you can build a championship around. They traded him to the Hornets in exchange for Alonzo Mourning. And he had his big man. Now, Alonzo Mourning wasn't quite, in my opinion, Patrick Ewing or Shaq, but he was a quality big man. And who in his prime would get you 20 points, about 9 or 10 rebounds, get you 2 or 3 blocks a game, give you a great interior defense, and one of the most prolific shot blockers in the league. He got dunked on a little bit, but that happens to any prolific shot blocker because you're not selective in who you're trying to go after. You're not going after the little point guard and trying to get some King Kong blocks. So you also challenge the big dogs. You're going to challenge the big dogs and the high fly dunkers. So, it's almost like a fastball pitcher. You go after everybody. You're going to make some home run hitters and some great hitters look foolish, but from time to time you're going to get touched up a little bit. You're going to give up a couple of tape measure home runs. That's just the name of the game. So that's why guys get dunked on a lot. Back in the day. But anyway, Mourning, one of the best big men in the league, they got him. I think Steve Smith went to Atlanta Hawks, and they drafted Kurt Thomas, one of the biggest. I think that was key for that Miami Heat team. And they got Tim Hardaway. And that 95-96 team were a really good team. considering. I think they were the eighth seed. The Bulls beat them pretty badly in the first round. I think they beat them like by an average of 23 points per game. But the next year, that Heat team was shocking. They won 61 games. And that Knicks team, to contrast the two teams, they were a very good team. I think that Knicks team would have finished with even more wins if they didn't have more injuries toward the end of the season. They wound up with 57 wins, and that team went on a collision course in the playoffs. And we all know what happened. Well, if you're old enough to remember, you know what happened that year in the playoffs. They had the big fight where certain guys got suspended. The suspension, I think, was unfair toward the Knicks, and that turned the 3-1 series lead for the Knicks into a 4-3 Miami Heat victory because certain guys for the Heat that were suspended were not as critical to the team as it were for the Knicks, guys who were suspended. But these guys will be rivals in the playoffs for the next couple years. But what we started noticing, if you follow the teams, is that, don't get me wrong, the Heat had up and down years. They had up and down years. But slowly but surely, the Knicks started falling off as a power in the Eastern Conference. You stopped seeing the Knicks up there. You started seeing more other teams. The Pacers sort of stayed up there. But then later on, you saw the Sixers and Allen Iverson come up there. And then later on, even still, you saw the then New Jersey Nets have their little run. And then later on, you saw the Pistons. But the Knicks started fading away. Guys started retiring. And the new management for the Knicks and the new coaches, they couldn't quite do what Riley did. They couldn't do what Riley did, because Knicks coaches don't have the power that Riley or the influence. Even before Pat Riley left, because he didn't have any sway. At least he had that influence, the respect, that stature. These guys coming in as revolving door coaches, they didn't have any power. And slowly but surely, the loser, mentality started seeping into the Knicks organization. And Allen Houston had bad contract and bad luck with Antonio McDyess and all these guys getting hurt. And the Knicks just slowly but surely, they became a mediocre team, and then they started becoming an atrocious team. And that never really resolved itself. People thought Carmelo Anthony might be able to turn things around, but then bad luck seeped in. They weren't able to get another big quality, free agent signing. They settled with Amari Stoudemire, but Amari Stoudemire already was starting to break down from the microfracture surgeries and the knee issues and all that. Carmelo had some great individual games for the Knicks, but at the end of the day, the Knicks, aside from one or two good seasons, they've been a terrible franchise. Meanwhile, the Miami Heat drafted a guard back in 2003 named Dwayne Wade. And Dwayne Wade would go down as one of the top 3 or 4 shooting guards in the history of NBA, depending on how you look at Jerry West. And that team had a improbable run in 2006 to an NBA championship where Pat Riley fired Stan Van Gundy and stepped down to coach that team to the promised land. All right, that team went on to win a championship that year. And the Miami Heat would stay at least a decent team since then, for the most part. And then, of course, in 2010, that's when they got LeBron James, Chris Bosh to join Wade. And that team went on to become a little mini dynasty. That team went to consecutive finals in 2011, 12, 13, and 14 and winning 2 championships. And Pat Riley being at the helm as the executive with the Miami Heat. And look what we see today. The Miami Heat defied expectations and, saying they're sitting there with, I think, a 16-6 or 17-6 record or something like that. Third in the Eastern Conference, where the Knicks are, guess what, at the bottom of the NBA. So it does make you wonder what would have happened if the New York Knicks had decided to give Pat Riley what he wanted and he stayed. It's a lot of what ifs. Not saying the Knicks would be totally different, but I'm willing to bet that the Knicks wouldn't be in the position that they're in right now, and Miami wouldn't be in the position that they're in right now. The Miami Heat in the last 20 years, they've won 3 NBA championships. They've been to, what, 5 NBA finals? I'm just saying. They've had great players like Chris Bosh, who's going to be a Hall of Famer. They, of course, had LeBron James, who's a bona fide NBA Hall of Famer and one of the greatest players in history of NBA. You know what I'm saying? Dwayne Wade, the greatest player in the franchise of Miami. And who the Knicks really had, the best player they've had the last 20 years has been Carmelo Anthony. And he only played there for, what, 5 years, I guess? So it is what it is, man. It is what it is, man. You just have to sit back and you wonder, what would the Knicks be, man? What would the Knicks be if they're able to keep Pat Riley? Another question that you have to throw out there too is, what if the Knicks were able to land Michael Jordan back, the very next year? The Bulls didn't really want to give Michael that $30 million. They didn't want to give him $30 million, but they knew he was old. Michael had been really loyal to the organization, had been accepting those pay cuts in the essence. He was only making $2 million a year. Even back then, that was chicken feed. So Michael wanted a payday, and the Bulls didn't want to do it at first. The Knicks called and said, "We're going to give you $25 million in 1 year," which at the time was unheard of. That's like $40 million a day. And the Bulls had 1 hour to reply or counteroffer, or Jordan would have signed as a New York Knick. So you do wonder about a lot of these what ifs. But this is the biggest what if, because I think this is the most realistic. If Pat Riley had stayed with the New York Knicks, I guarantee you they would have won at least one championship since then. I guarantee you that. This guy is one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NBA. When I think of the greatest coaches of all time, I think of Red Auerbach, I think Phil Jackson, and then I think Pat Riley. Those are the 3 greatest coaches. When you talk about executives uh, and coach and having success, overall success, it's Auerbach and Pat Riley. And when you think about these 2 guys, Auerbach, Red Auerbach is so revolutionary, and I respect him so much because, in a time when you saw segregation in the NBA, he didn't give a fuck about that. He said, "I want the players out there that's going to help me win ball games." You know what I'm saying? Get me Bill Russell. I know Bill Russell can turn this franchise around. Get me KC Jones. I want KC Jones. I want Sam Jones. I don't give a fuck about what color their skin is. Fuck all of that. I want to win titles. And they beat the shit out of everybody in the NBA back then. And then when he went to the front office, the Celtics consistently drafted great players because he had an eye for talent. He saw something in John Havlicek during those practices. He knew that Larry Bird would be a great player. He saw something in Kevin McHale in Minnesota. He knew that Robert Parrish would be a good asset. You see what I'm saying? Red Auerbach has such an eye for talent. You know what I'm saying? I think he is the greatest architect in the history of NBA. But Pat Riley is up there. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I know if Pat Riley was still with the Knicks, they would have won one championship, and we wouldn't be seeing this bullshit we're seeing with the New York Knicks right now.